We're now approaching the exam period, and because this term we're going to not have any formal exams, there are a number of background issues or concerns that a number of students have had about how to deal with the alternative. On one hand, you'll find that in most cases the formal exam has been commuted to a take-home online exam of one form or another. And I think quite reasonably a number of students have a number of, if you like, technical concerns. So I thought it would be appropriate to deal with some of the issues that you need to give thought to in preparation for the exam. The first one should be obvious. Be familiar with your resources and with the unit. After all, the purpose of the exam is to give you an opportunity to display what you have learned about the unit. And so it's very handy if you have learned about the unit in order to be able to display what you know about it. Some people go into take-home exams thinking, well, I have all of the resources available. I don't really need to study because I'll just look up the book when I know what the questions are and it will be so easy. It's not quite like that. What you will find is that the exam will be asking you to show your familiarity with it, and if you have to go thumb through 100 pages of study notes or what have you in order to find the answer to question X, then you're going to find it very slow indeed. And so being familiar with the unit obviously is what we do for all exam preparation, and not the least take-home exams. And in some ways, some students experience greater stress because they know that the examiner knows that they have the textbook open in front of them. And so, of course, you'll be able to look at the textbook. But the important thing is, how familiar with the textbook are you? Is the exam period the first time you've opened the thing? Not a good look if it takes you half an hour to find something that you should have been reading and thinking about maybe sort of 5 or 10 weeks ago. Okay, so be familiar with your resources. Because you have your resources all at hand, if you have a paper textbook, it's a good idea to violate probably a lot of those rules that your mother and primary school teacher told you about never writing or drawing in textbooks or books in any part. Sure enough, it's a library book or one comes down off the shelf from, your family collection or something. Don't write in it. But for your own textbooks, especially for textbooks, and generally for other books that you might have cause to study rather than read, it's actually a good idea to mark them. And a sign of good scholarship, of good learning, if you like, is to have margin notes, underlining, these days highlighting, to show what you have learnt, to make it easier for you to go back to, and generally to be a resource, a reference system, if you like, into the future. If you have a textbook that you might be looking at in your professional practice over the next 10 years, and even though textbooks change in edition, the contents don't change that much, and graduates often go back to their textbooks and their notes and what have you for years after graduation. And so having them marked up is actually very useful because these are resources for you after all. So mark up your textbook, unless there is a particular instruction not to. And for a take-home exam, that's very seldom. Some of you, especially in the law subjects, will know that open book exams are not uncommon, and sometimes, not always, open book exams specify that there aren't to be any marking or comments or notes or additions or what have you to the material that is allowed into the exam paper. You need to be very aware of that, but take-home exam tends not to happen. Okay, be familiar with your resources, very important. A good way of preparing for the coming online exams, take-home exams, is still to look at past papers. After all, we're teaching the same material in the units. We're going to be examining pretty much the same things. In most formal exams, the formal exam covers the entire unit. You might need to check for your particular unit. And what examiners have asked in the past, they're probably going to be asking similar questions, albeit in a different format in this current one. So past papers are still useful. Related to the past papers issue is the question of time management. And we need to look at this fairly carefully, and this is something that you will need to give thought to as you go forward for preparing for the online exam. Time management, what does this mean? Exams at CQU are typically either 3 or 4 hours, and the take-home exam is usually written to be able to be done in about the same length of time, perhaps with some allowance for the fact that you're typing rather than handwriting. And so whatever the exam is, it's not going to take you 12 or 24 hours of sleepless attention. It will be something that when you set your mind to it, you'll be able to knock out in about the same amount of time as a formal exam would have. So either 2 or 3 hours, depending on what the norm is in your unit. So time management is still useful. Obviously, in many cases, you're given more time available in that period. But time is an important issue remaining. It's probably not a good idea to expect that you're going to need all of the 3, 6, 12 hours or what have you that are allowed while the exam is open and available, simply because we know of our psychology that people tend not to use their time very wisely if they're given too much of it. And in a take-home exam, you need to apply a little bit of your own self-management there. Okay, time management. In amongst all that, most coordinators, most unit coordinators have opened their exams for more time than is actually needed. And again, looking at a 2 or 3 hour paper, we have the timetable, which allows 3 hours or 3 hour slots, regardless of whether they're 2 or 3 hour papers. Most coordinators are making the papers available for a longer period. It might be 3 hours for a 2 hour paper, it might be 6 hours, it might be 12 hours, and even up to maybe 24 or 48 hours, or I don't know, perhaps some unit coordinators might have even made their exams open for an entire week. It's really up to them. However, regardless of what amount of time you have, time management is still important and relevant. And I would recommend that you do allocate your time accordingly. Now, one important thing to avoid is to say, well, I've got a 2 hour paper and I prefer not to take time off work. The paper gives me 48 hours to do it and it will close at 6 p.m. on Friday night or whenever it's going to be. And you say, well, it's a 2 hour paper. I'll give myself 4 hours between the hours of, after lunch, say 2 o'clock on Friday, till 6 o'clock when the thing closes, to actually sort of do this paper. It's only going to take me 2 hours later. That may work. But if you have any problems, let's say your computer crashes or whatever, you will be running yourself relatively close to the line. It would be far better to aim to complete your exams as early as possible in the time allowed rather than at the end. This is particularly an issue because now you're not going to have a supervisor looking over your shoulder to make sure that you're in there at the exam and be able to give you extra help, if you like, if your pencil breaks or something. Here you have to rely on your own computer, your own timing and so on. And so that's quite a responsibility that comes back to you. This leads to other related questions. Things like how reliable is your computer and your computer technology, your internet connection and so on. Might it be better for you to take yourself down to the local library where there is a good, fast internet connection rather than do it at home where things might be a little bit more touch and go, especially if you live in remote areas? Is your computer one which occasionally does crash or what have you? Are you able to borrow a computer that might be more reliable? is there some circumstance where you may have less difficulty? For instance, if you're using a laptop, and laptops are very useful in some regards, you want to make sure that you've got the power supply available and all that sort of obvious stuff. Another fairly obvious thing a lot of people can forget is the importance of backing up. If you're doing an online exam, typically you'll be writing answers in some form, either progressively into Moodle questions or into a Word file or whatever, and uploading the result at the end. I recommend very strongly that you remember and practice the same discipline that we apply to any other writing of important things. Say if there's an essay that's due or what have you, and you're getting close to the deadline. Really, really important to, as you're writing, back up regularly, often. The more often that you back up, the more insurance, if you like, because it means that you're able to maybe only lose 10 minutes of your time if you're backing up every 10 minutes, for instance, and the computer dies or there's a blackout or whatever happens. And so backing up progressively onto your local computer, maybe onto a Word file or whatever it is, even if you're entering the answers into a Moodle page or a Moodle question quiz or what have you, still write them out, maybe just the answers or what have you, onto another document, onto a Word file, and then just copy and paste backwards and forwards. The advantage is that if the lights go out, then you have that record. It is up to you to take responsibility for making sure that your computer doesn't die inconveniently. It would be nice if the university was able to say, well, in all cases, we will simply accept that you need an extra day or something because your computer died and you lost your hard drive or something. But unfortunately, we don't have that supervision, and when you think through it, it's really quite impractical. On the other hand, taking reasonable precautions. And by the way, if you are concerned about the performance of your computer, think in terms of using things like cloud-based saving. So if your computer does die, and if its hard drive does kind of start to have smoke coming out of it or what have you, if you've been doing your work progressively using Dropbox or Google Docs, or saving to a thumb drive like a USB stick that you can pull out of your computer and back up somewhere and just put into another computer if you need very easily, obviously that's wise, because there are time constraints, even though those time constraints are fairly comfortable. And so give some thought to what strategy you're going to follow for your own data security. Security as in not kind of keep it hidden from everybody else, so that's important, but data security in terms of you not losing it and not having to come along and say, well, I left doing the exam till the last moment because I had to go down to the bar with my friends or whatever it was, and it turned out the computer crashed just before I pressed the send button, and I've lost 3 hours of work, and I've only got sort of 30 minutes to go, and the computer takes 30 minutes to reboot. Isn't that really sad? And can you help me? Maybe we can, and obviously we want to be sensitive and responsive to people's needs. However, if it's simply because you haven't bothered to back up, could be an embarrassment and a difficulty. And so we don't want that to happen. So practice with your computer. Obviously practicing typing and so on would be handy. Practice your backing up routine so that you've got that worked out. Consider very strongly backing up to something like a thumb drive, a data stick, or to a Dropbox account, or to a Google Docs account, or one of the other cloud-based backups, so that if necessary, you can take yourself onto a different computer. It would be wise to have a backup plan. And so if your computer does die, is there a friend or what have you that you might have nearby who knows you're going to be doing an exam at Friday afternoon or what have you, and knows that you might be giving them a little desperate call and saying, please, my computer has just died, can I bring my data stick over and continue on your computer? That would be a very wise thing to do. These are all things you can give some thought to. And if you do that, and especially if you practice before the exam, it gives you a greater chance of going in with the confidence to be able to apply yourself to simply doing the exam rather than the extra stress of not knowing what's going to happen when the wheels fall off. It's simply a matter of making sure that if they do, you're prepared for it. All the best for the exam. I hope these comments and suggestions are useful for you, and by all means go into your preparation with becoming familiar with your resources, practicing on your computer, and having a backup plan, if you like, so that you don't leave yourself exposed to that nasty possibility of your computer doing something unexpected, something perhaps it's never ever done before. And all the best with the exams.